Welcome back, everyone, to Space City X-Files, the podcast where we explore some of the most fascinating mysteries and phenomenon from around the world. It's bittersweet that this is our last episode for Season 1. We're going to be taking a bit of a break, but we're going to come back with an amazing Season 2 for you all, that's for sure. In this episode, we'll be discussing the Maury Island UFO incident, a strange and intriguing event that took place on June 21st, 1947, near Maury Island in Washington State, USA. This incident, which involved a local businessman's claim of witnessing 6 unidentified flying objects in the sky, has captured the imagination of UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike for decades. Join us as we examine the details of this controversial case, along with the evidence, and do our best to gain a better understanding of one of the most talked about UFO sightings in history. This is episode 20, the Maury Island UFO incident. Before we get started, allow me to say a few words. We thank you dearly for all your support and for listening. If you're new or would like to become a supporter, there are 2 main ways to do so. First, if you would like to make a monetary contribution, you can go to our website and click on the Support Us tab, and there it will allow you to type in whatever amount you want. 50 cents, $1, $5, whatever amount you want, no pressure. Secondly, the most effective way is you can leave us a review after you listen, wherever you listen. I can't say how important this is because with your feedback, we can improve our show and bring in more listeners, which is priceless. One last thing, we still have our Patreon membership, which comes with perks, and our show store is still open, and this helps support also. Thank you for your consideration. All proceeds go back into the show, and that concludes the announcements. All right, let's get started. As we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking about the Maury Island UFO incident today, and this case is an important one in the history of ufology. This case here was actually just weeks before the Roswell incident, and it's also one of the first sightings that contained multiple witnesses to back up the story. In this case, it would have been the story of Harold Dahl. Now, this really also grabbed the attention of the nation and the world because it wasn't just one person saying they seen little green men. No, along with Dahl, other people witnessed the crafts, some being experienced pilots and accomplished businessmen, so this added to the whole wow factor of this mystery. Along with the other first, this would be the first case that perked up the ears of the government officials, causing them to send the FBI and military personnel to come and ask questions about what this thing was. Now, the Maury Island UFO incident also began the pattern of government secrecy, and it also started the denial surrounding UFO sightings that continue right up until this very day. With that said, let's jump right into the case details first. Harold Dahl, a logger and salvage company owner who lived in Tacoma, Washington, was out on a boat with his son and his dog and a couple of crew members on a Wednesday at 2 p.m., June 21st, 1947. They were out in a little area called Puget Sound, which is a little place near Maury Island, when Dahl looks up and spots 6 donut-shaped metallic objects hovering in the sky over the waters. As Dahl kind of approaches, he sees that the objects were about 100 feet in diameter and it had this hole in the center. Now, suddenly, the crafts, take notice of Dahl and they start to make their way towards his boat. And when they get close, they begin to just kind of hover above them. Now, one of the things that stood out the most to Dahl is the strange sound that came from them. So it wasn't loud, but it was like a powerful whirl. And it's one that he hasn't heard before in his lifetime. According to Dahl, the crafts hovered and rotated in perfect unison for some time until one of the craft's rotations started to turn into a violent wobble, and then it began emitting a glowing white substance. The object then exploded and shot out a large number of metallic debris that rained down on Dahl's boat, injuring his son and killing his dog instantly. The debris that came out was unlike anything Dahl had ever seen before, which is kind of saying something since he was in the scrap salvage business. You would think that he would be familiar with all types of different metals. He describes the debris as a white metal that was light in weight, but had incredible flexibility, and it also produced an incredibly strong magnetic field. A close examination of the metal would reveal that it was covered in a strange symbol that resembled Egyptian hieroglyphics. Dahl was somehow able to navigate his damaged boat to the shoreline, and he leaves and returns with his boss, a man named Fred Chrisman, to try and recover some of the debris that fell. Now, when they arrive, they find the debris on the boat and they start to load it into their truck. And as Fred looks back out into the waters, he states that one of the crafts come back and it kind of seems to pursue them for a short time. But it doesn't really come all the way to the beach. It kind of stops short of the coastline. And then before they could react or do anything, the craft disappears in the blink of an eye. These are the events as they happened, according to Dahl and his small crew. Now, according to reports, Dahl was patrolling the area, and I suppose it was because it was 1947, just a short time after the war ended, so they probably still had their guard up from any possible attack that can come by way of the Atlantic. So the first person Dahl turns to is his superior officer, as he calls him, and that happens to be Fred Chrisman, who we just mentioned. Now, Fred, from what I digest, was a bit of an enthusiast at the time, and we'll hear to what degree soon in case theories. So, naturally, he kind of took the lead and helped Dahl report the case to the authorities. And it would also be Fred that makes contact with the press in hopes of getting recognition for the incident. So, now that we've heard the incident details, let's see how it was reported and who were interested in these claims. Alright, so shortly after the incident went down, Dahl and Chrisman report what happened to their employer, who was the owner of the boat Dahl was using, and also was the owner of a local company called the Crescent Harbor Mining Company. And this is the employer of both Harold and Fred at the time. So the owner of that company would put them in touch with a man named Ted Morello, who was a reporter with the Tacoma Times. So Ted has a sit down with Harold and Fred, and after hearing the story, he can immediately tell that he has something worth printing here. Not only is it something that has never been printed or heard of before, but Harold and Fred are stand-up guys who patrol their neighborhood in their spare time to protect their friends. Why would he have any reason to conclude they were lying? I mean, this was 1947. Like, to put your reputation on the line for something that was a joke was unheard of at the time. In fact, you could probably forget about ever being taken seriously again if you were found out to be lying. And I mean, you can't really look at it from the perspective of today's world, you know, where everyone on YouTube and TikTok are doing crazy shit daily in order to maintain their shock value, you know, because they have little repercussion for their actions. In fact, people think it's cool and then they imitate it. But back in those days, it wasn't like that. So Ted Morello printed his piece in the Tacoma Times, and in the article he states the incident details and that the debris that Harold and Fred found on the beach that day was not of this world. So, needless to say, after this one story, the case kind of catches fire. And in a short amount of time, it's the talk of the nation, and it's soon reported on by huge news outlets like the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Daily. Eventually, it'll catch the attention of a magazine company and the U.S. government, who both play a big part in this case. So let's look at how they were involved. Now, the Maury Island UFO incident and these two figures are heavily connected because of what is said to happen in the aftermath of the story. But how true are they? So what we'll do is we'll introduce what is said to happen here, and then we'll address the controversy surrounding them a bit later. So first we have Raymond Palmer, who was a science fiction writer and editor of a magazine called Amazing Stories. He somehow found himself in a sit-down interview with Harold and Fred, who reached out to who first is conflicted, and we'll get into that more here in a little bit. But after hearing the story, he sold that this is exactly the type of material he wants in his magazine. So he posts a few articles about it, and this brings even more publicity to the case. It said that he acquires the help of a colleague of his named Kenneth Arnold, who's a bit of a celebrity himself in the terms of UFOs, and he brings him on to help investigate, to which Kenneth Arnold agrees. So, according to some, Kenneth meets with the guys and is so intrigued by the debris evidence that he calls in some of his old army buddies to come and have a look at it themselves to try and gain more perspective. So his buddies come and they check it out, and they take some back with them on their plane, but somewhere between Washington and San Francisco, their plane malfunctions and they crash, both dying in the accident. Now, from what I understand, the government already had interest in this case, but because of this crash, I cannot say for certain that this is what caused them to launch a formal investigation. I don't know if it was happening before or after the crash. But with that being said, let's look at how the government was involved. So in cases like these, the one thing you can count on is the overall mission statement from the government officials. And this one played right into it. So they state that the only reason why they have any interest in the case of Harold and Frank was to ensure that there was no threat to national security. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that before, right? If you follow UFO cases. As we mentioned earlier, this case likely started that very trend. The U.S. Air Force was dispatched to investigate the matter, and upon their arrival, they had an interview with Harold and Frank and also looked over the debris. But at the same time, the FBI was also dispatched, performing the very same task the U.S. Air Force was. Only in their official records, they say one of the two men involved retracted their statement and claimed that the whole thing was a hoax in the end. Now, their official report is declassified now, which we'll include in the show notes. And I recommend you take a look if you find this case interesting, because it's packed with information and tons of little facts that help give insight into this case. Far more than what we can cover in 40 minutes. So have a look at it. Alright, now let's talk about another entity that had an interest in this case. And this is a type of, like a shadow entity, if you will. Some speculate that this particular organization had a heavy influence on the man changing their story. So, apparently, two unidentified men in black suits paid visits to both Dahl and Chrisman, along with the two Air Force officials put in charge to investigate what happened in the incident. In both accounts, the men in black informed both parties that they were not to talk about anything they seen or experienced regarding the Maury Island UFO incident. They would also confiscate the debris from Captain William Davidson and First Lieutenant Frank Brown, thinking they had all there was. But it was later found out that Davidson and Brown had more of this debris, and they took it with them on the B-25 plane that mysteriously crashed days later when they were flying back to California. So the other shadow party involved in this case, there's a lot of shadow people, so try to keep up, would be an anonymous caller who the FBI have knowledge of and have his correspondence listed in the official case files. Now, this shadow figure was thought to likely be Fred Chrisman, but there's no solid evidence to prove this true without a doubt. In the case files, it says that the anonymous caller contacted an FBI agent and told them that the 2 Air Force officials who had just left the area had debris with them from the UFO. He tells them that the plane was shot down, which the FBI confirms, and then he tells them that they will later find that the 2 parties involved that passed away in the crash would be, of course, Frank Brown and William Davidson. The FBI states in the case files that the names of the deceased pilots had not been released at that time. At the time of that call, those names had not been released. So, the anonymous caller somehow had knowledge that he shouldn't have. The anonymous caller also told the FBI that the plane was shot down by our own people. These are the main people and reports involved in this UFO case. Just want to note that there are many controversies surrounding these claims, and we'll go over them. But for now, I'm just letting you know who and what they are for reference. Alright, so far, we heard the case details and found out the people involved. We found out the reports made. Now let's transition into controversies and theories surrounding the case and claims. There's quite a few, so we need quite a bit of time to cover them properly. That's why we're jumping in so early in the episode. So, the first controversy we'll touch on is Fred Crispin's involvement in the case. Now, it's kind of funny how Fred found himself intertwined with Harold Dahl's UFO sighting because, as we mentioned earlier, Fred Crispin was a bit of a UFO enthusiast. For one, old Fred also had a bit of a troubled past before the Maury Island incident, and this included charges like burglary, fraud, and perjury. This, combined with his inconsistent testimony, caused many to question his credibility as a witness. It's also reported that he was working together with Palmer, the owner of the Amazing Stories magazine, for quite some time before the incident. And as we know, the magazine is basically about fringe sci-fi stuff. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it's unknown who reached out to who for help on this case first. Many say Crispin reached out to Palmer, which would deliver a serious blow to his motive behind the whole ordeal. It's important to note, though, that there are just as many scenarios having Palmer see the story in the Tacoma Times, and then he reached out to Crispin and Dahl. Another thing to remember about this case is that Dahl never said anything about aliens being involved in the event that went on that day. All he said was that he seen something unidentifiable flying around in the air. It's thought that the connection between Dahl's story and aliens was fabricated by Palmer under his own accord in order to add more pizzazz to the story, which in turn would help him make more money. Now, of course, as with most of the details involved, this evidence is circumstantial and speculative. Whether any of it's true may remain a mystery unless something or someone comes forward. Next, let's have a look at the Men in Black presence. So, many who have produced theories about the case have the presence of the Men in Black written off as a fabrication of Fred Crispin. Which could be true, I guess, but then again, this case happened before Roswell and many of the other major UFO incidents, so for me, I kind of find it odd that Fred would create something like this simply from his imagination. I mean, if he was creating this story, I mean, he could come up with anything. I mean, since it was his imagination, he could make up any story he wanted. Why would he make up a story about men in black suits? And my point is that it's almost too plain to be made up. Also, what about the countless other people who have claimed to have been visited by men in black suits after reporting something strange since the Maury incident? So, I can't give you an exact number, but just to name a few: witnesses in the Mothman case, the Gulf Breeze sightings, Rendlesham Forest, the Phoenix Lights case, pretty much anyone who ever reported a UFO sighting during the UFO wave of the 90s, all have reported at some point that they were warned or questioned by men in black suits. So what is this? I mean, is it just a big coincidence? Are all these people making up the same character? It's very odd. Here's another controversy surrounding the case. So how did the anonymous caller know about the B-25 plane crash, and how did he know that the two who were killed in the crash were the two who recently investigated the case? They never say in the FBI report how they figured this caller came about the information. They only say that he had it. The anonymous caller also states that the Army kind of like cordoned off the crash site and they wouldn't let anyone in to examine the wreckage until, a good while later. Well, after cross-checking this information with old news articles about the crash, it was reported that the military had complete control of the site and they were being very hushed about the details. Oddly, in the end, they concluded that the cause of the crash was from engine failure. It just seems like they went through a lot just to come to that determination. So, during my investigation, I found one common argument that made a case the anonymous caller was lying. And that was the fact that he mentioned the plane was shot down by a 20mm cannon. Now, I've seen this quite often refuted by the claim that planes of that year didn't carry the 20mm. But after some research, I found that that wasn't always the case. It was super easy, apparently, to affix a 20mm cannon to a B-25 or a B-52, and many did that same thing, that very thing during the World War II. So, it may not have been a common thing for them to do, but it was far from being an impossibility. And so let's wrap up the case with the main theories that support and oppose the Maury Island UFO incident. It's about that time. So starting with the supporting theories first, in this case there are only really two that stood out to me. One would be that Dahl and Chrisman were telling the truth. The supporting evidence for one was that there were multiple witnesses. So who do we have? We have Harold Dahl. We have Fred Chrisman. We have Dahl's son. We have at least one of the crew members that were aboard that day. All claim to have witnessed the same UFOs. Now, you would probably find yourself asking a question. Okay, so you got a big shiny object in the sky, about 100 foot in diameter, flying around at a pretty high altitude. Of course, somebody else in the nearby area would have had to seen these crafts too, right? I mean, that would be a good question, a logical question, and it turns out that they did. So, a few homeowners on the nearby island of Vashon claim they seen the UFO in an article posted by the Tacoma Times. So, why didn't these testimonies make more of an impact? Well, perhaps they were visited by the men in black like Dahl and Chrisman. Another supporting factor would be the hard evidence. So Dahl and Chrisman had something. We may never know what it was, but they believed in it enough to put their reputation on the line, along with the reputation of Arnold and Raymond. And it was possibly the reason two service members lost their life. Now, unfortunately, Dahl and Chrisman are long gone, and their secret as to what they had may have died with them. Next, we have the amount of coverage and investigation by the U.S. government. So, if this was a hoax and an obvious fake, like some people claim it to be, then why was so much time and effort wasted on it? Why have so many branches of the armed forces or the government investigate at one time? This doesn't help your case that, there's nothing to see here, A few years after the incident, Chrisman would defend his claim that he and Dahl were intimidated by a shadow force of men in black suits, and would also bring up a good point when asked in an interview about the supposed hoax. So Chrisman would say that the Maury Island incident was not a hoax. It was real and it happened. He finished the conversation by saying the government knew that what happened was real. They knew, and they silenced them, and in order to remain free, they retracted their statement. If it wasn't real, and it was just all a joke, one that caused the death of two military personnel who were just doing their jobs, they would be in jail, not free, out on the streets. Now, this insinuated that the government only required their silence. It also hinted that the plane was possibly down by something that we probably wouldn't understand. In my personal opinion, even if the crash was accidental or a malfunction, the two would be brought up on charges, hoax or not. I don't see the government letting that slide, I was in the military also, and I know a guy who was brought up on charges because he kept the sight from his rifle after his deployment was over. So yeah, they're not letting that go. The FBI released their own statement in kind of a response to what Chrisman said, and it went something to this accord. They said, "We did investigate heavily, and the reason for that was because Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman were going to be brought up on serious charges. Only after our interviewing and seeing that it was a hoax that mushroomed out of their control, we decided not to prosecute." So basically, in the FBI report, it said that one of the two, Harold or Fred, and you can't tell because their names are redacted, but it has one of them saying the news stations were the ones forcing them to say things, and when they talked to each other, the stations would publish the conversations without even asking. So what that statement meant to me was they felt sorry for the pathetic fools and decided to show mercy and let them off with a warning. That doesn't sound like the government I know. Harold and Fred were lucky they weren't dealing with the IRS, that's all I know. And finally, the last argument to support the Maury Island UFO incident, to support that it was real, is the track record that the government developed for covering up UFO sightings. So, supporters of the Maury Island incident point to other cases like Roswell that was handled poorly. I think we can all agree there. And also recent developments that prompted the release of classified investigations of 144 new UFO cases in June of 2021. So this caused many interested in ufology to feel a sense of confirmation that, what they believed all along was true. And so now let's look at the main reasons that people doubt the Maury Island claim. So the main issue is the inconsistency in the witness testimony. And this happened in pretty important details of the case. Like, for one, first Dahl initially claimed that he saw 6 UFOs, and then later in an interview, he said there was only 1. So that kind of seems like a big detail. Something that you wouldn't easily mistake, right? Was it taken out of context? It's possible. It's possible that what he was talking about was the time when him and Chrisman returned to gather the debris from the beach. Because then they did say it was only 1 UFO, not 6 or 5. Another discrepancy is the lack of physical evidence. So though the claims were many, the hard evidence was lacking. So the molten metal that spilled onto his boat was never accounted for. Also, the photos that they said that were allegedly taken by Dahl and Chrisman never surfaced either. This, of course, makes it really hard to verify their claims. And then we have the allegations of the hoax. So there were many reasons given to suspect Dahl and Chrisman of having an alternative motive to make this UFO claim. One, of course, was to sell magazines. And, of course, it didn't help when they found out that they were involved with Raymond Palmer and Arnold. The other reason that it could have been a hoax was they were looking to possibly defraud the insurance company for the damaged boat. So apparently when the Air Force officers came to investigate the claim and they seen the boat, they realized that it was nothing like what Dahl had described in his memo. And this brought on the idea that either he switched the boats to try to pass off his and claim insurance, or he simply just wasn't being truthful about what happened. This was pretty interesting, though, because from what I read, the boat that Dahl and Chrisman were using actually belonged to the mining company that they were working for. So how would that work with the insurance claim anyways, when it doesn't belong to you? I don't know. This is another mystery that appears in a case that's already loaded down with mysteries, I guess. Anyways, there you have it. Here are all the facts presented to the best of my knowledge. And as always, I'd just like to say that my findings are just an examination of the case and are in no way a claim that I have solved this mystery. It's neither an attempt to sway you into believing what I believe. In fact, I welcome you to come share what you think, because it's better when these topics are discussed in an open forum. And I always appreciate the feedback. So there you go. So the time has come for me to give you my own personal opinion on what this matter is. And I'm going to say that I believe that Dahl and Chrisman were telling the truth. I think they saw a UFO out there that day. Whether it was 6 or 1, I don't know. But I think they saw something. And it's just the culmination of all the events that took place and the evidence and the investigation that make me believe it to be true. I feel like if it were just all a hoax, those men would be in jail for sure. There would be no free pass or no passing the buck on those mean old newspaper editors. They would be in jail. Plain and simple. I mean, 2 people lost their lives. Anyways, that's just my personal opinion. The truth is, though, is that, the Maury Island UFO incident is going to remain a controversial topic, and it's going to be heavily debated, probably to time indefinite. I mean, you got some witnesses saying, you got some people saying that the witnesses weren't credible. You got other people saying that it was a government cover-up. I mean, ultimately, the truth about what happened at Maury Island is probably never going to be figured out. And the incident will likely continue to be a subject of interest and speculation for years to come. But anyways, that's our take, and that's going to do it for this show. And, it was fun. And I'd just like to say again that I thank you all so much for being with us and listening. And we can't wait to come back with season 2. And we're still going to be dropping videos every now and then for our Strange Happening series on YouTube, so be on the lookout for that. Anyways, alright. Thank you all for joining us. This is Rick with the Space City X-Files. Take care of each other, and until we meet again, keep exploring.